What's going on, everybody? It's Wide coming at you with a brand new video, and it's something a little bit different today from the normal pattern, because this is the very first Elestrals deck profile up on the channel. I've made a few Elestrals videos, a lot of set openings. I had my structure deck opening with the packs. I also had the creator box opening, which I'm still super grateful for. It's super awesome. And I've also had some gameplay up. I've had 2 different games against my friend, once on a structure deck on his end, and once when he actually, well, technically it was still a structure deck, but he actually got a much more competent one and absolutely beat my ass. And now that I've more comfortably settled into the game in terms of actually playing it, I've been playing in a few of the casual webcam tourneys when I'm not working, I've managed to find a deck list that I actually really love and that I think is really strong, and that is Drakking, or I guess you could just call it Rockin' a Hard Place Turbo, because we're playing the whole shebang. I think it's really cool that we're finally starting to get some really strong aggro-based decks in the game, now that we have a lot more ways to go second properly, even with the removal stuff gone. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into my Drakking deck profile for the November 2024 format. Starting off with what else but the rock-based Elestrals, we have 3 copies of our good man Edward, 2 copies of Drakid, 2 copies of Drakking, and 1 copy of Curibus. These are basically your bread and butter Elestrals. You will be trying to go through them basically every single game. It's kind of like the whole game plan. Eddie is one of the best cards in the game. It's in the top 10 most played for a reason. Being able to switch things to defense is really good, not to mention his good stats, and of course being able to ascend into Curibus when you play Rock. I'll be the first to tell you that Drakid is not a great card. It's kind of doo-doo poo-poo shit. But it's literally just there to go into Drakking with the Rockin' a Hard Place. You really don't want to use the first effect very often because it doesn't really come up literally ever, but it's just there for an extra way to easily get into Drakking with a Rockin' a Hard Place. Plus, I mean, if your opponent has something like a Gorgons, they're going to want to shotgun on the Drakid instead of anything important because they don't want you to go into Drakking, because Drakking is just so damn strong. Being able to be a Go-Yo Guardian, essentially, for Yu-Gi-Oh! Terminology, is really good, and it's right after you attack over it, so you get to do damage or attack over something else with that Elestral you just stole, which I think is a little bit too strong, and like, you know, I could easily see this card going on the Tartarus list once the deck gets even stronger and once the game gets even faster, because I think this card is just genuinely kind of nuts. Then Curibus is really good at getting rid of problematic threats that Drakking can't. It's really the main reason for its existence in here. It's a little bit bigger, so it can get over slightly bigger things without the use of something like Atlantis. And of course it has that very good non-targeting destruction effect. It can out things even like Chronodile, but it can also out things like back rows, so if your opponent has a Shield of Achilles set for your Drakking, you can use the Curibus to out that a little bit early. And of course, here are our 3 copies of Rockin' a Hard Place to go along with all of these dudes. Such a good card. I mean, seriously, for just 2 spirits, a water and a lunar, you get to force your opponent to choose between a rune and a celestial they have, which is a really good way to make them have to like actually think like, oh shit, which of these do I value more? You know, if they have a Drakking they can go into off of this with like a Drakid, then, you know, I want to get rid of my Elestral so they don't steal it, but then at the same time, you know, I don't want to lose like my really important back row piece, especially if you target something like a Divine, which is really good. They're almost always going to get rid of the Elestral, and then it can't be chained by counter runes, so if they have something like a Gorgons, they're going to have to wait until after, or even a Tsunami technically, I suppose, but it doesn't really matter too much for Tsunami. And a big thing about Rockin' a Hard Place is that a lot of people kind of just have to assume that you have the Ascension if you have Rockin' a Hard Place, or if you have the little dude that uses Rockin' a Hard Place, sorry. So like if you normal cast Eddie or Drakid and they know what you're on, they have to shotgun a Gorgons there, otherwise they risk running into a Rockin' a Hard Place, losing that Gorgon's Gaze, and then getting smacked with a big dude, or having to at least lose something before they're able to use the Gorgon's Gaze. And they know that if they use Gorgon's Gaze, you're probably not going to use the Rock, or you're less likely to use the Rock, because you won't get full value out of it. I mean, I still use it sometimes, I'm just saying. But it's a really good mind game, because your opponent has to assume that you have the Rock at all times, as long as you have the little dude, and so it really makes them shotgun certain effects that they wouldn't otherwise, which can be really helpful for you. And I know my friend who's playing a similar list doesn't want me to leak it, but I'm gonna leak the goo to y'all. I have confirmed this, not only with people on Twitter, but also with a judge during a tournament. If your opponent thinks they're being slick by not setting any runes, or I guess if they don't have any Elestrals either, but by not setting any runes or anything like that, and they think, okay, now they can't activate Rock, they can't get their Ascension, and I'm in a really good spot, you can cast Rock anyway, as long as you misenchant it. So, for example, your opponent thinks they're being super cool, they're like, okay, I'm going to prevent my opponent from using Rock and getting their Ascension by not setting any back, or I'm going to sit on this Astrabet or something, right? You can normal cast your Eddy or your Drakid, and then cast Rock anyway as long as you misenchant it. The effect conditions or the activation conditions will not matter as long as the card is misenchanted. And I'm assuming this can also go for cards like the Lunar Phases, which is going to be really good for the Lunar Phase cards, like the Werewolf one, for example. If for some reason you can't meet the activation conditions of that, you can still use it if you misenchant it, and a bunch of other things. This can help immensely. It came up in the tournament, as I mentioned. I was playing against, I think, yeah, it was another Rock player, actually, because we were both amazed at the end, or he was amazed, really. He was like, oh, that's so cool, because he wasn't setting any back row, obviously, because we know what we're playing, and then I use the Rock anyway, get a judge call to make sure everything's okay. I misenchant it with 2 waters, and I go for my big dude anyway, and I absolutely blow the guy out. Super cool ruling, and is very, very good for this deck, and makes it all the more lethal. For a little bit of extra aggro to help go into Drakking without having to hard open the Rock in a hard place, we do have 3 copies of Tadpuff. Yes, I know there's a face downs there. I am still waiting on mine to come in, but I have been playtesting, of course, as though I do have the 3 Tadpuffs. But Tadpuff is really good in this deck, because you don't always want to have to go for the normal cast Eddy, or especially Drakid, and then go for the Rock in a hard place. What if you don't have one or the other? Well, all you need is your Tadpuff and your Drakking, which you can easily see with a card that I will mention later on in the profile. And then the Tadpuff will be a free special summon, or a special cast, I should say, that can help you go immediately into the Drakking and start playing super aggressive right off the bat. Plus, what's really cool is that if your opponent is really worried about something like a Drakking hitting the board, you can special cast the Tadpuff. They hit you with a Gorgon's Gaze because it prevents you from ascending that Elestral, and so you can normal cast something like Eddy or one of your other things that we will get into, just for free anyway, and just kind of bait out your opponent's Gorgons. I don't actually own any Gloombats currently, but if you do have Gloombats, you can easily play like 2 and 2, like what Caleb.exe and them are playing, but I think that 3 Tadpuff is still fine. I'm also playing 2 copies of Smoltuga and 1 copy of Nekruff. This is a blind second aggro deck, really, for the most part, but in the odd case that you don't see your combo even after using things that we will discuss later, or after using your mulligans and everything, or if your opponent forces you to go first, maybe they're on something like the Blazeros OTK, or they're another Rock player, you can easily just sit on a Smoltuga, grab a Nekruff on cast to have a follow-up card even if they out the Smoltuga, and then have a really big wall, really big beater, and it's just really hard for your opponent to out the Smoltuga half the time without using a removal card, or having to shotgun something like their Eddy, which means that something like your Kuribus will be safe later. We have 2 copies of Dratagua as well. We are playing a water deck. We want to play Dratagua. Really good both when you're in a losing situation to help you stall a little longer, but it's also really good when you're in a winning situation. A lot of people will have their Drakking or their Kuribus on board, and they want to start just piling on a bunch of aggro. They'll put all their stuff in attack position, even like a Smoltuga, and they'll just start punching for a lot of damage. But all it takes is 1 turn of your opponent having a Shield of Achilles, or having a Earthquake, or resting on your laurels in certain cases if you just have the Drakking, where you can be in a really bad spot right after that, and they can start making a comeback, and they're going to start being very aggressive towards you now. Realistically, all you need is your Drakking and the things that you steal in attack position, and then you can use things like your Dratagua or your Smoltuga to play very defensively, and start recovering your resources before your opponent can make a potential comeback, because there is a lot of comeback potential in this game with those removal cards, especially against a deck like Thunder, which is a very strong deck against this one. And the final Elestral we're playing is 2 copies of Veritaqua. I wasn't sold on this card at first. I was like, it seems kind of niche, it's a little specific, how often am I going to want to cast this over something else? But the more I play with this card, the more it's really starting to grow on me. The amount of Astrabets, especially during the webcam tourney, that I just absolutely demolished with this card is hilarious, because they sit on the Astrabet, they're like, okay, I can sit on the Astrabet, they don't have anything big enough, you know, I outed the Drakkings and stuff, and the Kuribus, and especially against the, I think it was a Thunder Nexus player. It was a game where I had like literally everything all the time, and he was like, okay, at least I can sit on this Astrabet in his head, and then I just normal cast Veritaqua on top of all the other stuff I have on my board, and he just scoops it up right there. So yeah, Veritaqua, really, really good against things like Astrabet or any other big bodies, and also really good when you Tsunami your opponent, and you were to use the Veritaqua to crash. Moving on to our Invoke runes, we have 3 copies of Ambrosia, because it's Ambrosia, and it's the strongest card in the game, and you get your stuff back, and and its Ambrosia. 3 copies, this is the card I was talking about earlier, of Drops of Leith. This is another card that I wasn't sold on until I was talking with people like Caleb and Ren on Twitter and everything about that. Drops of Leith is so strong in this deck. It's really good in like any aggro deck, honestly, as long as you're not going through a bunch of spirits right off the bat. Like, for example, the Blazeris OTK deck might not really want to play drops very frequently because they burn through a lot of fire spirits already. But Drops of Leith feels so good in this deck because a lot of the time you really just want to get your Drakking out, or bare minimum a Curvus. But most of the time it's really just your Drakking. So you're going to want to go Drops of Leith, shuffle back a bunch of things that you don't want, but you get to keep the things that you do want, which makes it better than a mulligan for the same price. And you get to draw the exact same amount of cards you shuffled back, plus 1. The Drops of Leith replaces itself, which is really good. So if you open like a Rock, or a Drakid, or a Tadpuff, or a Drakking, you open one of those, but you're missing the other piece of the combo, you can Drops of Leith shuffle everything else back in your hand into the deck, and then draw the same amount of cards, plus the Drops of Leith replacing itself, and you can see the other piece of the combo that you need very, very frequently. I really, really love this card, and bare minimum, at the end of the day, if you are going first, you can always just side copies of it out to put in something more defensively, such as like a Sluggle or something. Just for a little bit of more digging power, we are also playing 2 Nectar of the Gods here. Nothing too crazy. I mean, going Nog into a Drops of Leith is even stronger because that's even more cards you get to put back. You do just have to watch out a little bit for how often you're using cards like Drops and Nectar, because you can lose a lot of spirits very quickly, and for something like a Jirtogwa super early, you can end up running out of resources if you fly a little bit too close to the sun. That's why we're only playing 2 Nog. Final invokes are 1 Earthquake, 1 Laurels. These cards are so strong. They're limited for a reason. Being able to just get some removal, especially against something that could threaten your Drakking, is really, really good. Or in case you are in a losing situation, Laurels can be very, very powerful, especially, and help you get back onto your feet. We're also just playing a single copy of Atlantis in the main for the Stadium War. Again, as I mentioned, Thunder Nexus is a very, very powerful deck against this one. Not just because Thunder, of course, is like the best spirit type in the game, let's be real, because it has everything it has going for it, but also because Race to the Top is really good. Earthquake and Laurels are limited, but Race to the Top is not, so Thunder arguably has the best removal in the entire game, and they have to have Mount Olympus up for that, so bare minimum you can at least use the Atlantis to get rid of the Mount Olympus and prevent the Race to the Top, as well as making stuff not as hard to beat over. For example, things like an Astrabbit in defense position, and you can always just side more in case you feel like the Stadium War is just that important. Finally, onto our counter runes. We have 3 copies of Gorgon's Gaze, 3 copies of Poison Tipped Arrow, and 2 copies of Tsunami. These are basically like the best counter runes in the game, honestly. I've seen a lot of Drakking players not even play the Gorgons, they're just playing PTA and Tsunami. Some of them aren't even playing the PTA, but it's most of the time at least just these 2. I really like Gorgons though. I think Gorgon stops a lot of really important effects from going off, especially in case you don't see your combo but you do see the Gorgons. You can stop your opponent from going into super crazy Ascension plays. For example, Electra Knight coming out in Moonrise. You really want to shut that down as fast as possible because that card is insane in terms of your opponent getting advantage. Also things like Astrabbit, things like a Leo Bright for Solar because Celestleo is super strong, just an example I came up with from the tournament. Yes, it is a little bit expensive compared to something like just a Poison Tipped Arrow, stopping your opponent from getting a big body permanently on board, but I think Gorgons, you have a lot of ways to like out things in this deck, by the way. It's not like PTA is your only like removal, so you can at least beat over stuff, so Gorgons isn't as big of a deal there. But I think Gorgons is just really good from stopping your opponent from getting advantage, compared to PTA in which your opponent can at least use the effects of the thing before it dies, or even use it for like an Ambrosia or something to get the resources back regardless. And I think it's only going to become even more important as the game gets faster and more reliant on Elestral effects, and so you really want to stop your opponent. It's really good in case you don't see your aggro play and you don't see your combo, you can at least stall your opponent from getting the resources. Finally, moving on to spirit count, we are playing 13 Leviathans, if I can get all of them in frame here. Boom, 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 boom. 13 Leviathans, 5 Owloons, and just 2 Teralis. These are of course just here for the Earthquake. There are certain times where I would kind of like a 6th Owloon, but without the dense fogs in the main like I used to have them, they're in the side now. There's not really too much of a reason to play a 6th, I'm also, again, I don't have the Gloom Bats, I'm not playing Spectarius or anything like that. And plus, a lot of the time I end up kind of just using these as fodder. I'll use them for my Drakking summons, I'll use them for like an Ambrosia cast, I'll even sometimes expend them for stuff like Nog, in case I've already felt like I've gone through enough waters. But we do want to play a lot of water, even though Drakking is like our big body, because, I mean, it's the easiest one to get back. I mean, we have things like Dratogwa, we can put them all back, we can always just shuffle them back with Ambrosia too, of course, and we can constantly just spam things like our Eddy and stuff like that. And that's going to do it for my Drakking deck profile. I hope you all did enjoy. I've been having so much fun with this deck. I think it is super strong. I really always did love aggro decks like Dinosaur and Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm super excited to tinker with this deck once Moonrise hits, because we're getting a lot of pretty cool water stuff in there. And I think that this deck will continue to be a very strong contender. But that's just my opinion alone. Yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended. And if I content or somewhere like it, like some more Elestrals content, which I'm going to try and pump out a lot more of, then perhaps consider subscribing and turning on notifications if you haven't already, because support your channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, if you want to support me directly, getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards and link down below. Use code Aurora5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout and support me financially. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon down below to see what benefits you can get from my $1 and $5 tiers if you also want to support me financially. Well, once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.